Welcome to the second session of the 8-week series of the Taping and Movement series brought to you by Elastoplast. All these sessions are free and will be led by your industry professionals from a variety of professional sporting backgrounds. And so thank you for your attendance. My name's Sam Ward and I'll be running today's second session. So my background is I'm a physiotherapist based down on the Northern Beaches. I'm the director of Physio Ward Sports and Rehab, and I run two clinics, one in Narrabeen and one in Newport. So my background is mostly in rugby union. I was a former rugby union player, played overseas professionally, and spent majority of my time though here in Sydney playing for the mighty Warringah Rats. So today I thought I'd discuss a little bit with you all about injuries in kids. It's quite a big topic, and we'll try and cover off a number of things, and the session will go for approximately 40 minutes. Also, at the end of this, I'll be having a little bit of a Q&A, so if you could start thinking about any possible questions that you might have for me, and then I might be able to answer them for you at the end of the session. So before we start today's session, obviously we have some housekeeping rules. So we have two Elastoplast representatives controlling today's session. And if you have any questions, please direct message them in the chat forum. Because we have so many people in today's session, everyone will remain on mute until such a time when the floor will be open to questions. If you have any question in question time, please virtually raise your hand and the Elastoplast representatives will take you off mute to ask the question. Again, as there are so many participants, we apologise in advance if we don't get time to answer everybody's question. And finally, we finish with the disclaimer. Always read the label, follow the instructions for use, and if symptoms persist, talk to your health professional. So I've just got a few slides here. I'm just going to start sharing my screen, which I am going to try. 1 moment. Yeah, screen. There we go. Okay, so yeah, sport injuries in kids. It's a very big topic, and it's something that is very important, obviously, in a growing population. So there's quite a number of unique challenges when obviously facing kids, and myself in the clinic, I see this multiple times a day, and it's something I really enjoy doing. It's something I really enjoy treating, and the unique challenges faced with that. So a little bit on the overview of tonight. So with the topics I'll be covering off will be sort of a little bit about the sports participation. What sports are they playing? Is there a decline or a trend in terms of age in the amount of sports or the type of sport they're playing? Then talking a little bit about the injury risk in children, how that differs from adult, and obviously potential injuries that we may see or encounter when treating these kids. Obviously then flying into the factors of specific significance in terms of, differentiating in the maturity, their growth rates, and looking then finally just one of the real common injuries that I see a lot, and sort of how I would treat and manage that condition. So yeah, obviously very important in the well-being of kids' sport, and it's probably the most popular form of physical activity for kids, and it obviously teaches them lots of different things in terms of, obviously helps with great foundations in terms of learning how to work in a team, and also for myself being in sport as well, I always considered it a really like a little mini community. So you learn to deal with certain different personalities, get everyone on the same page, and working all together. Obviously, with sport, though, there is a number of risks and concerns, and it is one of the leading causes of injury in kids, unfortunately. Sometimes this injury risk is a big deterrent for parents in allowing their kids to play sports or certain sports. But in saying that, most of the injuries we see in kids are minor, but from time to time we do see something quite severe which will need immediate treatment and possibly have some lengthy rehab or repercussions sort of down the track. So the benefits of sport. So obviously we have the physical, mental and social. Physical benefits sort of include like improved coordination and balance, increased strength, obviously, increased cardiorespiratory fitness, and obviously changes in body composition. There's a photo there of the mighty Collaroy Cougars, one of the local rugby clubs down here on the Northern Beaches. Obviously, one of the big benefits of sport, and something we probably realised more so during the last year with COVID, is like the mental health benefits of exercise or sport in general. Obviously a lot of sports got shut down, and there's obviously a lot of challenges faced with, burning off that energy and letting sort of a bit of stress reduction and helping with our moods and obviously reducing anxiety as well. And then the obvious social benefits of it as well. So social skills, communicating with people, how to get your point across, and then be accepted by the team. And then obviously, learning to become a leader in amongst the team or your group. So a little bit about how many kids actually playing sports. So this Ausplay Focus is a study that a big study they do where they ask a bunch of different people every year, and they do it. So some of the data coming out of 2017, and we'll compare that to some a little bit closer to COVID, and then in fact during COVID. But in terms of child participation frequency, it was obviously there that 63% of kids recorded having performed at least once per week outside of school, and they reasonably seen that statistically significant, considering it was up from 56%, whereas 3 times a week, so increase in frequency, saw a reduction in participation, so it dropped down like more than half in that one, which is understandable, but also slightly disappointing. So then, look, what this is here looking at this graph is in terms of the participation related in sport. Obviously, we have the gender there, male and female, male being the blue, green, and then obviously the percentage of kids playing sport as well. So as you can see, there's a trend up there, but we see a decline in the 12 to 14 years range, particularly in the girls in comparison to the boys. So like, why is that? So obviously becoming a teenager can be something that can be explained for that. Obviously changes in social circles, and obviously changes in like physiological things as well. Also in those older age groups, we tend to start to see some sports specialization. So you'll find that kids might stop playing multiple sports and sort of specializing in one particular sport. This obviously is associated with like much higher risk of injury and also burnout. And also, obviously, once we get into these age groups, it's more of a focus on winning, or that winning culture in a lot of things anyway. Not always, but in a lot of things it is, there is that focus for winning. So in those younger age groups, it's obviously common for me in the clinic with the patients that I'm seeing is discussing that they, like John might come into the clinic and he's got rugby on Saturday, rugby league on Sunday. He's got touch football on Monday, Wednesday trainings, and then he's also got basketball and he's got sprint training as well. So it's in terms of that, it's a unique challenge in trying to obviously allow them all to do that. But it's actually really good to have kids performing over multiple sports. So most of the recommendations these days is obviously across multiple sports and then specializing later on. So it reduces the risk of burning out. Some of the other things that this study brought out was that they were talking about in terms of who is to blame for this reduction in weight? Like, are we to blame as parents for reduced participation? Because one of the things they found in the study was that the main reason, the barrier to a kid's participation in out of school hours was simply that the parents felt like they were too young to be playing sport, and or the fact that the basically physical activity was not a priority for the parents and or the kids. So that was probably the main takeout of that. So then also in terms of the reduction with girls and boys being there, they found that like a quarter of boys reported not liking physical activity, whereas it was higher at a half of girls reported not enjoying physical activity, and that's between obviously that 12 to 14 years old age range. So in terms of sorry, I missed the slide. There we go. Sorry, yeah. So, and then obviously comparing this more so to 2019, so pre-COVID, reasonably similar numbers in terms of that 62.1%. So there wasn't really a huge increase across that range, with obviously swimming being the most popular. What with swimming, I think it's got a passion to, it's much more common in the lower age groups. And I think this has got a lot to do with obviously learn to swim programs, and obviously the necessity of doing or learning, the importance of learning to swim, particularly in Australia. And the team sports starting to come in a little bit later, around that sort of 9 years of age. But up until 9 years of age, it's often more common for the kids to be swimming. One of the other interesting things is and which is probably another topic for conversation, is, well, why is swimming such a big important thing at a young age, whereas athletics is not as important? So we go to learn to swim classes, but it's not as popular for people to go to like a learn how to run training. So that's something of note or to think about. So how did COVID affect obviously sports participation in kids in 2020? So with regarding comparison to adults, obviously 90% of athletes reported, adults reported having competed or performed some form of exercise in the last 12 months, and 73% in the last day, whereas the children in comparison is 72%, and then down at 16.7%. So that's like a far greater thing. So obviously children were affected more during COVID because of, we can liken that to the team sports being shut down, where it's much easier for an adult or someone just to take themselves for a run or a walk, or they're more inclined to do this, whereas kids are probably less inclined to just take themselves for a run, and they enjoy that team atmosphere and they get excited by seeing their friends and things like that. So that's obviously something that was quite significant to come out of this latest Ozplay report from the year. So then now moving on a little bit into the injury risk, and obviously we're going to look at factors of the specific significance in the kids and what we see or manage regularly. So I suppose for me, one of the biggest mistakes I see in terms of how people treat kids is that we treat them like little mini adults, and it's just really not the case because of a lot of factors. And I think it's not intentional, but I feel it's due to maybe just a lack of understanding. And there's a lots of, oh, you'll be right, get up and go, keep going, keep pushing through. So I think this all sort of contributes to this increased vulnerability that they experience. So part of that vulnerability is there's obviously the physical and physiological changes in their growth and development that are occurring. For example, like within bone structures in the adult bone, with kids, it's obviously maturing and it's much more cartilaginous, so it's going to be able to be able to withstand impacts without like a real big break. So you sort of see high prevalence in green stick fractures or growth plate fractures. And yeah, so then one of the reasons I think is that the muscle strength is obviously not the same, in which then causes that increased imbalance and instability. And so, for example, one of the things we see slightly more commonly in females, particularly, is that the ACL rupture is quite more prevalent in those younger populations, in the adolescent populations. So one of the impacts of obviously with kids, or the challenges that we find, is that growth is not linear. So at a set age, a kid is not going to be a certain size, and that the bones obviously all grow at different speeds. So there's going to be different areas of the bone, and so that's going to obviously predispose it to obviously injury. Also, obviously, as a kid grows or becomes or matures, we see, obviously, particularly when we're born, the relative size of the trunk and head is greater than that in obviously the extremities. And obviously then as we grow or we develop, then we see this obviously try and even out a little bit more. So variations in maturity, like what I mentioned before, sorry, just going to the next slide, is the kids, obviously, they mature at different ages. So regarding physical maturity, a boy will tend to mature slightly later than girls. So an early mature in a girl would be anywhere from that 7 years of age, or starting around that, with full maturity being closer to about 12 or 13, whereas the later maturers are sort of from that 11 years, reaching full maturity around that 16 to 17 years of age. In comparison with the boys, they're a little bit later, so 9 to 10 for an early maturer, and their full maturity for them around 17. And a late maturer, he won't start until he's sort of 13 or 14, and finally maturing around that 20 years of age to 22. So obviously, unfortunately for this bloke about to tackle that guy, one guy's grown a fair bit more before he has. So there's obviously then issues when discussing or talking about injuries in terms of sport, because it's we play as it's divided up into like your chronological age, so under 9s, under 10s, under 11s, under 12. So obviously, people who are late maturers, they're going to be at a far greater disadvantage than an early maturer in terms of obviously power, speed, size, and physicality. So one of the things that they see in sport is, particularly in rugby union, where they were one of the first sports to do so, is obviously implementing, in terms of safety for kids, is implementing a weight for age phase, where it's like from under 10s through to under 15s, where they would obviously, there was the size and the height taken into place, but then what they would also do, so that if someone was over a certain height or a certain weight, they just wouldn't automatically go up there. An independent coach is sort of brought in and there to sort of assess the person's fitness, maturity, and things like that. Because obviously, if it's a 80 kilo limit, you don't want a 9-year-old kid who's 80 kilos playing against an under 15s kid who's 80 kilos, because I know there's that size difference, or their size is the same, but that 80 kilo 15-year-old is going to be significantly stronger and more powerful than the 80 kilo 9-year-old. So, yeah. Another factor which is obviously significant for kids is basically their differential response to injury. So, obviously with kids, their bones is obviously divided up into 4 regions. So you've got the long main part of the shaft, which is the diaphysis, the metaphysis, which is this flattening end bit towards the end, and that's where the growth basically occurs. We've got the growth plate in there, which is just that little green line. So And then obviously within adults, that's all hardened. So there's no site of growth. So it's all, your bones are all set. And the cortex is much obviously stronger through that. So that growth plate is where a lot of the growth happens in bones, and it's obviously quite vulnerable to shearing forces. The tendon attachments also on a child's bone are much weaker, simply because of the outside of the bone is not fully formed and hardened. So it opens it up to basically injuries where the part of the bone or that cartilage on the outside of the bone is pulled away. So that's what we call an avulsion injury. So they're not a great injury to occur. Another thing which is slightly controversial is that obviously during growth, we can see like obviously reduced flexibility in tendons and muscles because the bone grows first, which causes the muscle to lengthen and then put greater tension through the joints. You know, some people don't think that is sort of the case, but I feel as though I see that a fair bit, that they just feel a general tightness through that. Then obviously with regards to these type of formations in the bone, we see a very different often occurrence of what type of injury occurs. So with the exact same mechanism of injury. So something that we would commonly see in terms of, like, say, if we're talking the hip and thigh, the mechanism might be an acute hip flexor muscle strain or extensor strain. So obviously muscle at the front of the thigh or at the back. So in the adult, we might simply see this as it might be a quadriceps strain, so a strain of the muscle on the front of the thigh, or a strain of the muscle in the hamstrings at the back. Whereas what we might get with a kid is, because the area where those tendon attachments isn't great and strong, instead of having that muscle strain, we might get an avulsion of that rectus femoris tendon muscle that runs down the front. So we get an avulsion there, and or we could get an avulsion of up under your bottom at the ischial tuberosity, so that sit bone where the hamstrings insert. Obviously, if we are talking about maybe a knee injury with the snow season coming up, like it might be a twisting type injury. In an adult, we'd probably see a meniscal or some sort of ligament, ACL, MCL injury like that. Whereas in the child, what we might see is a fracture in the distal femur, which is an area of high growth, or basically the proximal tibia. So the proximal tibia being just below the knee. One of the other things is that you can get is in regards to like ligament type injuries, that we can get an avulsion of the tibial spine, which is where the ACL inserts in the middle of the knee. And often that obviously will require surgery, just like if we ruptured the ligament as an adult. And then talking with the heel, so more like an overuse type injury. So in adults, we would see Achilles tendinopathy, so obviously pain radiating up the leg or down into the heel as well. Whereas what we will get is in a child is severs. So severs is obviously something that I see very, very commonly in kids, particularly those running, jumping, and in rugby. I see a lot of props in rugby union getting it because of the position they're having to put their body in, loading up those calves. So I thought maybe I would go a little bit more through, a little bit more in depth regarding severs. So Severs disease. So here, just looking at the well, first of all, it's also known as Carpenter epiphysitis. So over here on that other photo, that area for redness is typically where we will see, or the pain we're referring. They'll often come in with pain or discomfort in around that area. And then obviously just comparing there in terms of the two X-rays we've got on the left there, that's an X-ray of a kid's foot, and that what looks to be a broken bone is actually that's that growth plate, okay, and basically Achilles tendon then attaching down right on that point of the end of that heel. whereas in the adult bone, we're seeing that it's obviously all completely and fully hardened. So often, actually, as well, with if you do get an X-ray, or people get an X-rays, is a heel in a kid with severs will often look exactly the same as a kid who's not suffering from that pain as well. So very hard to obviously diagnose sometimes via X-ray in terms of whether you're thinking, oh, the kid's landed hard on his heel and you're thinking it's a fracture or anything, but it's just showing that type of pain. So how does this occur? So basically it's caused from repetitive stress to the heel, and most commonly during growth spurts, obviously, because the bone grows, the tendon's not as good a blood supply, and the muscle stretches, and then we get that tendon pulling on the base of the heel. And obviously the kids are more susceptible to this type of injury, and jumping sports and sprinting sports we'll see that more commonly. Or even in those kids who aren't playing sport, those who typically walk around in thongs and barefoot, I'll typically see those people occurring in terms of that type of pain as well. So why is it occurring? It's occurring because basically that area of the growth plate is quite susceptible, because that constant pulling on that spot, causing that shearing. So in terms of the symptoms of what they might arrive with in the clinic when they come and visit me, they'll obviously potentially be looking at their gait, so they might come in limping, complaining obviously pain and tenderness when putting weight through their heel. Often I see kids walking in on their toes because they're just trying to avoid putting any weight whatsoever through there. So in terms of managing severs, what my typical advice in terms of how I would go about that is, initially I would obviously, if they're wearing bare feet, I would obviously tell them that they need to start wearing supportive shoes. But my advice in terms of if they were from a sporting background would be looking more at obviously trying to reduce their overall load. And I typically advise people around that 20%. I find that's a good amount in terms of reducing or trying to minimize the pain. How they might reduce this, how this 20% might look for a patient, it might just be simply reducing the overall session length. They can reduce the number of sessions they're completing, or even just altering the things that they're doing within the session. So, whereas limiting change of directions, I find shuttles are very common in rugby unit training, and particularly turning and going off the one leg. So as simple as alternating which leg you change off each end, or just educating the child on that, I find that to be particularly helpful in trying to do that. Or just reverting to, instead of running a shuttle type drill, looking and doing more just straight line running if they're going to be doing some fitness, and obviously avoiding jumping or sprinting. One of the other things that I mentioned just before as well is the scrummaging. So scrummaging is quite a unique thing to rugby, and obviously there's a large load, particularly on the props and second rowers, in loading through their feet. Often they'll come into the season underprepared in terms of reduced amounts of scrum or reduced conditioning, or they've been playing basketball and now it's just gone straight in, and they have to go in and they're playing a gala day with five games on the one day, and they're running around with metal studs. So it's very important, I think, in that is obviously trying to educate them on, trying to ease into the next sport as well. So not just going straight from basketball into your rugby, particularly if you are a prop and you're in scrummaging, because you're obviously having to put your foot at 90 degrees and your toes are bent up. So there's obviously a big load that goes through the foot. One of the other things that's obviously interesting is like if they're still getting pain, and how much pain is too much pain for a kid. Regarding this, what I tend to say is that if if they have more than 3 out of 10 pain, then this is too much pain. So 3 out of 10 pain for me is that you would start to see an altered gait, or you'd start to notice an obvious limp or gallop. I think this is obviously a big sign that it's not obviously coping with the demand of what they're putting their body through. So greater than 3 out of 10, I would say that they then need to back off, or they're doing too much. A period of obviously rest is maybe required. So yeah, ideally I don't like to stop them completely, because I find that it can be detrimental completely if we stop them completely, because in terms of trying to increase their capacity, and then again, it will take a lot longer. So as long as it's not greater than 3 out of 10, because what will happen is, say this is their capacity at the moment, they go to here, okay, they push it too much, it becomes sore, so they rest, so you stop them, so they stop them here, and then their capacity goes to here. They then try and complete the next thing again, okay, it will then get painful and sore, they go here. So their capacity is slowly reducing. So I like to reduce them a little bit, find that load that's good, and then just slowly work it from there, trying to increase that load as able. So obviously regarding as well as activity modification, what other things we can sort of do to look to manage severs, and I will go through a couple of taping techniques shortly, but we can use heel pads or cushions in the feet in order to try and reduce or provide some padding under the heel. A heel raise to obviously reduce the height, so we avoid the lowering or the lengthening or shearing there, so that takes a bit of load off the heel. And obviously what I spoke about before, appropriate footwear. So in rugby, most boots now will come with a heel gradient into it. So all that is simply as a 10 mil lift at the back, and then it slopes away, and it works the same as putting a heel raise in. So it takes the load and tension out of there. And obviously I will also advise kids, particularly in forwards in rugby, that they need to get 2 pairs of boots. They need to have a pair that they play and scrummage in, and then they need to have a player that they will run around and train, because you obviously train way more than you play. So you need to have the nice, comfy, supportive ones. I always got laughed at rugby because I had the old gel lethals, which were very thick and comfy, and literally like running around in a sand shoe. Accompanying that sort of stuff as well is obviously some strengthening exercise. One good one for trying to create length through the tissue whilst also strengthening is an eccentric exercise. Eccentric, the muscle contracts in 3 main ways. So we've got, if we're talking about the bicep, if I'm raising a weight, concentrically contracting, I'm basically shortening the muscle. If I'm holding the weight there, I'm isometrically contracting the muscle, so it's not changing length. And then obviously if I'm lowering that down, I'm eccentrically contracting the muscle, and we're getting length. So we can kind of use this as a stretch, but it's controlled, and it will allow us to move through the entire range and get a good, nice, even stretch. So that's something I would typically subscribe as well. Obviously, the other things you can do is self-release techniques, trigger ball, foam roller through there. I'm not a huge fan of a big static stretch on it. I think that just makes it angry, and it'll irritate the tendon too. And the other controversial thing is obviously, the use of anti-inflammatories like, ibuprofen or the props and things like that. So I don't typically think that these are a good management strategy. I think if you're resorting to that as the first choice of management for a kid, I think you're doing not a great thing by them. I think you need to go through all the other aspects of trying to present it rather than putting something like that in them. And that's just my opinion. I know some people will say it works, which it probably does, but it's not something I'm a huge fan of. So What I was just going to go through now is a couple of little taping techniques that we can do in order to try and manage that, or if you know a kid or someone who's got sever's pain. I'm going to attempt to do this on myself, so this will be interesting. So what we've got here is an Elastoplast product. It's a fantastic product. I use it all the time on a daily basis. I find it's really good and helpful in terms of providing feedback on the skin in terms of like proprioception and showing that way. And also, I think it sticks really well, particularly when someone gets sweaty. The other product I'll be using today will just be some rigid tape, and obviously I'll show you a technique as well where we can use that one if that's what you have. One of the important things before applying the tape, the K-tape particularly, is cleaning the skin. If there's any sort of oils or creams on there because you've been given a rub, then it just won't stick as well. The other thing is you want to try and avoid touching the adhesive because otherwise as well, like I think it just messes with the oils on the skin as well, and then we just don't get a good stick. So if we don't get a good stick first away, the piece is virtually useless because it just won't stick down. Again, it also doesn't particularly stick well to itself. So if you want to stick multiple layers of thing, your rigid's the go. So in terms of the tape, it's the K-tape obviously has a bit of a stretch in it. So we can probably get, I think it sort of goes about 50%, I would say. It's not, it doesn't obviously hugely double, but it's quite effective. So when applying the tape, what I would obviously best suggestion is obviously to round the edges. So what we will do is round those corner edges so we don't catch any edges, or it doesn't curl up. It'll basically last longer. Now I'm going to try and see if I can get a good position here. Find my chair set up. So in terms of applying the tape, what I would do is actually, I'll just get out of my screen share. So one sec. This might be a little bit easier. Is that easier? So basically what we will do is I'll measure from basically the back of my heel and sort of up here to about the top or into the middle of the cup, obviously taking into account that there is some stretch in the product. So here we go. Okay. So I will go about here. So we're going to go about that long. I cut through there. Oh, sorry. Curling and rounding the edges. Okay. What I also like to do is cut a couple of other bits just to help secure it. I find with the piece on the heel, if you just scuff your foot on the ground or catch it, it'll curl up. So I put a little bit of an extra support around the heel. I'll curl the edges up on that as well. And then another T piece, because when the tension comes on often across the back of it, we'll see it sort of bowstring or come off. So I just want to basically maximize its effectiveness of sticking to the skin. So we'll just curl these edges. How are we going for time? Just curling those like so. So when applying the tape, we obviously do not want to apply any stretch or pull on the attachment side. So what we'll do here is obviously I pull through here, and obviously all of these tapes are all available via elastoplastsports.com.au, I believe it is. So I'll do my best to try to get this correctly done. But so tilt that down again. So taking the backing off here and going and applying it underneath my heel. I'll move back and forward. So underneath my heel. Okay, rubbing it on there. The adhesive likes to be warmed up so you'll get a better stick. So I'm in slight, and I've just hooked that just underneath, under my heel, sort of into the bottom of my arch. Then what I will do is I will take the tape, I will pull it back, allowing myself some tension there. So I've still got no stretch on this part. What I'll then do is I lower my calf down, okay, pulling a little bit of tension. It's sort of up to you what you feel like you provides best support for you, and then sort of running the calf up the back of the calf, and then on the end of it, no stretch. So then take your bit of tape, I find, and we can just rub it backwards and forwards, heating it up. Okay. Then with the other two pieces, this small little bit, I like to simply just put over underneath the heel. So you just take it again here, split it down the middle, okay, and then I just hook that around underneath my heel just to support and hold that. Just because the other bit, the outside bits, aren't going to catch my sock as much. And then this last bit, I'm just going to put it across it like a T-junction, just here, above here to stop this, just as support, because I also find that sometimes around the top of the Achilles, because there's lots of friction there with the boots and things like that. So again, pull, tear it around through, okay, and then pulling across the back of the ankle, like so. No stretch, not too tight. It's just simply there's a supporting stuff. So that's sort of how it is. I've gone a little bit wonky on the top of that, but that's okay. All right. Now I thought as well that I'd just go through a slide view. Oh, okay. Yeah. So am I still on the slide view? No. Okay, I'm just pulling that tape off. Try and see if I can prop my computer up a little bit higher so that I can then bend it for me. You can see down on my. Is that going to be any better? Possibly not. Might just quickly grab a different chair. Hold one sec. A little bit better. And then, so regarding the rigid tape, what we'll do is similar sort of positioning again for the taping. What I do is I basically create like an anchor or support. I'm going to try and do it from behind. Anchor or support, basically coming around the ankle, just above the ankle joint itself. Coming through here for the front, and then a secondary piece coming around through here to lock it off. Okay, and then typically because then what we're going to basically do is pull a little bit of length, and what I'm going to do is go from in a flattened position, so it's challenging. We'll attach it on the inside section of the ankle, okay? And basically what I'm going to do is cross around behind the back. Cross around behind the back. I might shorten that a bit. Okay, on the inside. Go across here, anchoring just above the inside of the ankle. Go around, okay, under, and then back across and around. So we're just providing that support, finishing on the outside section of the heel. Okay, I hope you guys could see that. There is these taping videos available via the Elastoplast YouTube channel. So there's 2 on there regarding the severs, so we can get a suss out of that. So that's basically what it is. And what it's happening is, so when I go down into dorsiflexion, I'm feeling that tension point there. It's basically supporting and supporting and taking the load out of that heel bone. So I hope basically those were two taping techniques that were helpful. As I said, it is a little bit more challenging doing it on yourself. I haven't done that for a while. So if you're wanting that resource, it is available on the Elastoplast website. So probably thinking, yeah, so moving to a bit of a Q&A now. So I'll just see if there's any questions. My son suffers from knee and shin pain. Any advice? Good question. So obviously it will be dependent on what is the pain and what has caused it in terms of, speaking of the knee is obviously something that is quite prone to a similarity to the heel bone. There is depending on where the pain is, often there's that pain, you can get what's called Osgood Schlatters. So it's the same sort of tractioning injury that happens, but it happens to the tibial tuberosity, which is down here on the front of the knee. In lots of growing people, or even grown adults, you'll see that some people might have a bigger than normal bump on the front of them, and that's generally a sign that something has been occurring there. So my advice regarding sort of knee and or that shin pain is to basically, if it is obviously to see a professional, but to immediately reduce a little bit of load, obviously dependent on how much pain they are getting. If there is just that 3 out of 10 pain, we're okay. We don't obviously need to immediately stop the support or the exercise they're doing. But if it is obviously sore, we probably should reduce a little bit of the loading. In terms of management for a condition like Osgood Schlatters, is that it will be very much the same in terms of building up some strength, reducing or understanding what irritating factors is it. Were they sprinting too early? Was he trying to jump too far too early? Didn't do enough of a warm up. So trying to make sure that you're ticking off all those boxes in terms of preparation prior to exercising. So yeah. Next question. Tips for muscle soreness during a growth spurt, especially in the calf muscle. So obviously it's something that we sort of discussed a little bit earlier, but in terms of that soreness in the calf, I'm a big fan of using a foam roller. I feel like it's something that's good in terms of trying to knead out the tightness in there. I'm not a humongous fan of the static stretch. Like what was said in the first one with Paul, was that, stretching more frequently but with less intensity is obviously beneficial. My theory with the foam roller is I imagine that a rubber band is like a muscle, and say that rubber band stretches across 10 centimeters from the A to B point. If we have a tight muscle, we're going to get places where there's going to be some increased tearing or tightness. So imagine we tie knots in the rubber band, and we take that rubber band again and we try and stretch that over a greater surface. What we're going to find, if there's a tighter spot or if there is an injury there, if there's an injury there, we're going to be tearing or making that injury slightly worse. Whereas if there's a tighter spot, it's going to be the last place that's actually going to be stretched. It's going to stretch either side of the knot, and the knot's going to stay there. So my advice with the foam roller or using a trigger ball is, prior to stretching, go in, try and find some of those tender spots, roll through them. Maybe if you find a sore spot, hold on it for a period of time and try and release the tension in the muscle there. And then afterwards, maybe doing a static stretch, because, well, the theory, obviously, we've removed the knots. We're going to allow for a nice, gentler stretch. So that would be probably my best advice in terms of if you have any particular calf soreness there. So that release work, and then obviously doing some eccentric strengthening, so strengthening whilst the muscle tissue is lengthening. Hopefully that answered your question. Next question. What is the best or right age for a child to concentrate on one sport? I'm not sure on the exact age, but I think the later it's done, the greater the chance for obviously a prolonged sports career or reducing the burnout. I'll have to get back to you on the exact right age if there is a specific age, but I definitely think like into the teens, later teens, that the later teens is probably when you want to be specializing a little bit more. Obviously, we see in swimming a lot is that, you know, think back to Liesl Jones winning the gold medal. Like I think she was 14 years of age. So I think some sports lend themselves to specializing earlier, whether that is based on obviously maturity and the growth. So maybe women specializing a little bit, or girls specializing a little bit sooner might be more appropriate. But as to the specific age, I don't believe there is one, but I would be more leaning towards waiting well into the teens. So I think we're basically out of time now. So I believe the next session is going to be on the Wednesday, the 12th of May. It's going to be 12th of May at 6:30 p.m. with Paul Tucker, who is a former head physio of the West Coast Eagles. He's going to be discussing injury topics around the thumb, wrist and elbow and presenting taping techniques on these injuries. So if you've registered for all of the series, you'll be able to send a link. You'll be sent a link again to be able to enter the platform. If you would like to know more, please contact your local business manager. And then obviously just to check up if you're wanting any sort of Elastoplast products to check out, I believe it is elastoplastsports.com.au. Thank you for listening and I hope you got something out of it. Cheers.